Welcome back to our channel. Today we're taking a deep dive into the dark and twisted world of crime as we count down the top 7 most notorious criminals in the United States from the 20th century. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's get started. Number 1. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal. Dahmer murdered 17 young men between 1978 and 1991, engaging in acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. Dahmer's method often involved drugging his victims before strangling them. His crimes were discovered when a potential victim escaped and led police to Dahmer's apartment. He was arrested in 1991 and sentenced to 15 life terms. Dahmer was killed by a fellow inmate in 1994. Number 2. Ted Bundy, the charming but depraved serial killer who terrorized the nation during the 1970s. Bundy confessed to 30 homicides, although the actual number may be much higher. He preyed upon young women, luring them with his charisma before incapacitating and murdering them. His method typically involved bludgeoning his victims and then strangling them. Bundy often used his charm to lure them into vulnerable situations. Bundy was arrested multiple times and famously escaped custody twice. Bundy's reign of terror came to an end in 1978 when he was arrested for a traffic violation. He was later linked to multiple murders and sentenced to death. Bundy was executed in the electric chair in 1989, leaving behind a legacy of fear and fascination. Number 3. Charles Manson, the cult leader who orchestrated a series of brutal murders in 1969. Manson's followers, known as the Manson family, carried out his orders, resulting in the deaths of several innocent people, including actress Sharon Tate. Though Charles Manson himself did not commit the murders, he directed his followers, known as the Manson family, to carry out his orders. The victims were brutally stabbed, shot, and bludgeoned to death. Manson's followers used various methods, including firearms, knives, and blunt objects, to carry out the killings. Manson's aim was to incite a race war, which he called helter-skelter, by committing these heinous acts of violence. Manson and his followers were arrested in 1969 and convicted of multiple murders. He spent the remainder of his life in prison until his death in 2017. Manson's twisted charisma and influence continue to captivate and disturb to this day. Number 4. The Zodiac Killer, a mysterious and enigmatic figure who terrorized California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The Zodiac claimed to have killed at least 5 people, although some speculate that the true number could be much higher. The Zodiac Killer's modus operandi involved targeting random individuals, usually couples parked in secluded areas. He would approach them, often wearing a hood or mask to conceal his identity, and then use a firearm to shoot them at close range. In some instances, he also employed a knife to stab his victims multiple times. The Zodiac Killer often left cryptic messages and symbols at the crime scenes, adding to the mystique surrounding his identity. His killings occurred mostly in Northern California during the late 1960s and early 1970s. The Zodiac Killer was never arrested. Despite numerous investigations and extensive efforts by law enforcement agencies, the identity of the Zodiac Killer remains unknown to this day. Several suspects have been proposed over the years in the Zodiac Killer case, but none have been definitively proven to be the killer. Arthur Lee Allen is perhaps the most famous suspect. A convicted child molester, Allen was repeatedly investigated by police and was the subject of several search warrants. He was never charged, and his fingerprints and handwriting did not match those of the Zodiac. Number 5. John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown. Gacy was a serial killer and sex offender who murdered at least 33 teenage boys and young men between 1972 and 1978. John Wayne Gacy's method of operation typically involved luring young men and boys to his home under the pretext of offering them work or money. Once there, he would overpower them, often using handcuffs or ropes, and then strangle them to death. Gacy buried many of his victims under his house, and some were found in nearby rivers. He often dressed as a clown for charity events and children's parties, earning him the chilling moniker of the Killer Clown. He was taken into custody on December 21, 1978. The arrest followed a lengthy investigation into the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Piest, who was last seen with Gacy. During the investigation, police searched Gacy's home and discovered numerous items linked to missing young men. Eventually, Gacy confessed to the murders and led police to the remains of 29 victims buried in the crawl space of his home and 4 others discarded in nearby rivers. Gacy was charged with multiple counts of murder, and his trial began on February 6, 1980. He was convicted on March 13, 1980, and subsequently sentenced to death. Gacy was executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. Number 6. Al Capone, the notorious gangster who ruled Chicago during the Prohibition era. Known as Scarface, Capone was involved in countless illegal activities, including bootlegging, gambling, and murder. While it's difficult to pin down an exact kill count, Capone is believed to be responsible for dozens of deaths, including the notorious St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. Al Capone's involvement in murders was usually related to his organized crime activities. His gang members would carry out hits on rival gang members or anyone who posed a threat to Capone's operations. The methods varied but often included shootings, stabbings, and beatings. One of the most notorious instances was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where members of Capone's gang dressed as police officers and executed rival gang members with machine guns. Despite his extensive criminal enterprise, law enforcement struggled to convict him on serious charges like murder and racketeering due to lack of evidence and witness intimidation. Capone was finally arrested for tax evasion, not for his more violent crimes. Capone began his sentence in the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta, but was later transferred to the infamous Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in 1934. His incarceration in Alcatraz marked the end of his dominance in organized crime. Capone's health began to deteriorate significantly while in prison due to syphilis, which he had contracted in his youth but left untreated. Due to his poor health, Capone was released from Alcatraz in 1939 after serving about 7.5 years of his sentence. Capone's mental and physical health continued to decline, and he suffered a stroke on January 21, 1947. He subsequently developed pneumonia and died of cardiac arrest on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48. His death marked the end of one of the most infamous criminal careers in American history. Number 7. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker who terrorized Los Angeles in the mid-1980s. Ramirez's killing spree included at least 13 murders, as well as numerous rapes and burglaries. His victims ranged in age and background. Ramirez's method of operation was brutal and indiscriminate. He would often enter homes through unlocked doors or windows, where he would assault and murder his victims. He would then brutally assault, rape, and murder his victims, sometimes mutilating their bodies with knives or other sharp objects. Ramirez left a fingerprint on a window screen at the scene of one of his last crimes. The Los Angeles police were able to match this print to Ramirez, who had a prior record for petty crimes. After identifying Ramirez, the police released a mugshot from a previous arrest to the media. This was crucial in alerting the public to his appearance. On the morning of August 31, 1985, Ramirez took a bus to East Los Angeles. Unaware that his picture had been widely circulated, he entered a convenience store where he was recognized by several patrons. Upon realizing he had been identified, Ramirez fled the store. Ramirez attempted to steal a car but was chased down by a group of civilians. One of them, an elderly man named Faustino Piñon, struck him with a metal bar. As Ramirez fled on foot, more residents joined the chase, eventually cornering and subduing him until police arrived. The police arrived to find Ramirez being beaten by a crowd. He was arrested and taken into custody, where he was charged with a series of murders, rapes, and other crimes. Richard Ramirez died of complications related to B-cell lymphoma on June 7, 2013, while still on death row. He was 53 years old.